up to and including the season 2 finale of The Mandalorian.
This is the way.
This is the way.
It seems to be a commonly accepted idea that Baby Yoda is a MacGuffin. This is a type of plot device that's often seen in various forms of media that actually has sort of a negative connotation. It's often associated with lazy or disappointing storytelling. And the perspective that Baby Yoda is a MacGuffin actually surprises me because I don't think that it's true. And of course, I am going to explain why. First, let's talk about what a MacGuffin even is. Alfred Hitchcock is often credited with coining the term, except that he actually got it from a screenwriter who he often worked with, an Englishman named Angus MacPhail. So hearing that, the Scottish feel of the term MacGuffin probably makes a lot more sense. But Alfred Hitchcock is the one who popularized the use of the word.
There are a couple of words that people need to know to understand all about you and your films, and one of them is a MacGuffin.
Now, I feel like there is a distinct difference between the actual meaning of the term MacGuffin and the way the term is being used today. According to Alfred Hitchcock, a MacGuffin is something that kicks off the story and sets the plot in motion, but has no actual bearing on the critical events of the film. In fact, the MacGuffin is often forgotten entirely. Maybe it's mentioned once or twice, and maybe it reappears at the climax of the film, but while it is something that the characters want, the audience does not care about it at all.
It's always called the thing that the characters on the screen worry about, but the audience don't care.
While the MacGuffin kicks things off, the story is often about something else entirely. Hitchcock loved to design a MacGuffin that was just as insignificant as possible. A perfect non-Hitchcock example of a MacGuffin is the heart of the ocean in Titanic.
It was worn by Louis XVI, and they called it Le Coeur de la Mer. The heart of the ocean, yes.
It kicks off the events of the film because that crew is looking for it in the shipwreck, but that's not what the story is about. The story is not about the necklace. The characters mention it a few times, and Rose is wearing it when she gets drawn like a French girl, and then she drops it into the ocean at the end. But the audience doesn't really care about the necklace. Like, nobody was watching that scene where Kate Winslet is on the door or whatever, and Leo is in the freezing ocean, and thinking, man, I really hope the necklace makes it. That necklace is a true MacGuffin. Although I do feel like the term has evolved to have a broader definition that encompasses any sort of object that sets a chase storyline in motion, particularly a powerful object. But that quality alone does not a MacGuffin make. Referring to the repository of knowledge TV tropes, there are two questions that you need to ask in order to determine if an item is a MacGuffin. Question 1, is the nature of the item interchangeable? And question 2, is the nature of the item irrelevant to the plot? Let's start with question 1. Is the nature of the item interchangeable? So what this question is asking is, if you swapped Baby Yoda for some other high-value item, would the story remain exactly the same? So if you changed him out for some ancient Jedi texts, or a briefcase full of high midi-chlorian blood samples, or the Darksaber, would the plot remain exactly the same as it was? No, it would not. First, it's the fact that Baby Yoda is a child, a living, breathing child. And he and Din bond with each other. Do most people call the character Din, or do they call him Mando? Because I don't know. And Din bonds with him. When Baby Yoda saves him from the Mudhorn, it gives Din a sense of responsibility over the child. And it shows that Baby Yoda is willing to push himself past the extent of his abilities in order to help Din. That essentially that bond is reciprocated, and Baby Yoda has like Baby Duck imprinted on Din.
You're joining our ranks.
Yeah, I've got some clerical concerns regarding my chain code.
And if you would agree to become my enforcer, clerical concerns would be the...
It's not the inherent value of the child that motivates Din. It's the emotional and familial bond that's developing between these two characters. And Din himself was a foundling. It is the way of his people to take responsibility for wartime orphans.
Reserve some for the foundlings.
As it should always be.
If the package were a weapon or a data stick instead of the child, Din probably would have just handed it over and the story would have progressed in an entirely different direction. Even if it had still been a person, but just an adult, Din likely would not have gone to such extremes to ensure their safety and still would have just handed them over. And also, if the child hadn't saved him and they hadn't bonded, the story still could have gone in an entirely different direction. A MacGuffin has no such hand in its own fate. And now for question 2, is the nature of the item irrelevant to the plot? Again, no. This is a child who comes to view Din as a father, while Din comes to see Baby Yoda as a son. That's not really irrelevant to the plot. I mean, yes, The Mandalorian is a space western action series, and I love that about it. But a core point of the story is also Din's emotional growth over the course of the 2 seasons, as well as, to an extent, Baby Yoda's emotional growth and his overall well-being. In season 1, the main trigger for Baby Yoda using his powers is to try and save Din. And in season 2, we learn that he's reluctant to use his force powers, but he only does so, well, for his own personal gain and getting those cookies, but also at Din's encouragement. And then at the end, when the time comes for him to leave and pursue his Jedi training, he doesn't want to go. And he only ends up leaving after he receives reassurance from Din. Like, those are not MacGuffin qualities. And Din comes to realize that he cares so much about Grogu that he is willing to sacrifice many of his closely held beliefs in order to ensure Grogu's safety. I mean, he takes off his armor. He takes off his helmet. The fate of both characters would have been entirely different if they'd never met. Din would still be the same character emotionally that we saw in the first episode of the series, and Baby Yoda would probably be getting tortured in a lab. true, Grogu is a child, and he may not be as fully fleshed out as Din. He may not be as capable of impacting the events in each episode as some of the fully grown adult characters. And there are episodes where he is not central to the core story within the plot. However, Grogu doesn't ever disappear. He doesn't stop being important. The audience never forgets that he exists or the danger that he's in. And when Grogu overextends himself beyond his Force abilities and passes out, the audience cares about his physical well-being. And if you were to try and describe Baby Yoda, he would have personality traits. Like, he's curious and stubborn, he's loyal, but a little bit selfish. And we also start to see hints of darkness.
No, stop!
You, as in the audience, are technically not supposed to care about the MacGuffin at all. But I think it's safe to say that we all care about Baby Yoda, like, a lot.
Have hunters tracking your location. Mando will fight for you. He'll make it right for you. Even though he took the compensation.
So, if not Baby Yoda, what would have been an example of a MacGuffin? Aside from the things that I listed earlier, one, admittedly not very thought out idea, would be if the package had been a holocron or a map with the location of a living Jedi, maybe even a map to Luke Skywalker.
Apparently he has a map that leads to Luke Skywalker, and everyone's after it.
And Din, for whatever reason, decided that he wanted to keep the map away from the bad guys, or he just didn't want to turn it in. And then this would set him on a series of completely unrelated adventures, traveling from planet to planet. And the Empire is pursuing him, but we never really hear about the map or about the Jedi again until maybe the season finale. That would have been a similar show, but ultimately the existing emotional heart of the story would be gone. The Mandalorian is essentially a story about a bounty hunter who takes responsibility for a child. The two characters come to view themselves as something of a father and son, while Din learns to care deeply about someone else, and also essentially about a cause. If we look at any movie where a very masculine man ends up having to take care of a child while facing some like outside conflict and complications, and then ultimately both the man and the child are changed for the better as the result of knowing each other, like, is the child in that story a MacGuffin? I won't say that Baby Yoda is the opposite of a MacGuffin, or that there's nothing MacGuffin-esque about him. Like, there was definitely a lot of intention in the creation of Baby Yoda in terms of marketability. There's also a lot I could go into about how the Mandalorian walks an impressively fine tightrope, and how Grogu helps balance the emotional component of a primarily action-oriented story where you also don't really ever see the main character's facial expressions, and on top of that, he is not a particularly loquacious man.
What the hell? Come on.
The show does a lot with body language and music and framing. And yes, the cuteness of Grogu and the very obvious care that Din has for him really help build a lot of character elements that facilitate that emotional connection with the viewer. I won't try to argue that Grogu has like a deep and profound character arc. I mean, Din is definitely the main protagonist. And maybe I'm just writing a bunch of technicalities here, because there are a bunch of tropes and plot devices that are at play within The Mandalorian. But, I mean, that's not inherently a bad thing. These are just storytelling tools, and it all depends on how you use them. So, if Baby Yoda were a MacGuffin, that wouldn't be an inherently negative thing. But I still don't think that he is. So now I leave you on these words of wisdom from the master of suspense, Alfred Hitchcock himself.
All breasts sag eventually.
Very true.